I played through Still Wakes the Deep the week that it was released, which at the point that I'm making all of this was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some of the more interesting merits of the game. It had been pitched to me as John Carpenter's The Thing, but on an oil rig. In fact, according to the game's lead designer, Rob McLaughlin, that was even the elevator pitch that was given within the development studio. The Thing happens to be one of my favorite movies ever, so I was sold on this game from the moment I heard about it. I put Still Wakes the Deep on my PS5 wishlist as soon as I saw trailers for it and it showed up in the PSN store. I bought the game on release day, and I made a point of playing through it that same week each night after I got home from work. I will say that I was a bit disappointed that the game didn't live up to the expectation of being The Thing, but on an oil rig. The Chinese Room has a reputation for making games that are the poster children for everyone who ever complains about walking simulators. Look, I don't have a problem with walking simulators in principle. There are some walking sims that I absolutely adore. Games like Gone Home, What Remains of Edith Finch, Firewatch, and arguably Return of the Obra Dinn and Outer Wilds are some of my favorite games. But just like with any other game genre, there are good games and there are bad games, and also lots of just mediocre games. I never really cared for the Chinese Room's other games, and I also think that Layers of Fear is horribly overrated. And I've played plenty of other stinkers too. But I've already made an entire video about walking sims in general, so I encourage you to check that out, if you're interested in what I think separates good walking sims from bad walking sims. In any case, I think that Still Wakes the Deep largely falls into that category of bad walking sims, but it's still better than a lot of other bad walking sims, so it's in that mediocre category. Most of the gameplay is just walking back and forth across the oil rig, only to pull a lever or turn a valve. The game tries to trick the player into thinking that you're doing more than just walking back and forth by throwing in some climbing, jumping, and tightroping, but the levels are all still completely linear, and all you're ever doing is pushing forward in the one and only direction that the game will let you go. There's no real puzzles, no open-ended exploration, no hidden secrets to find, no social simulation, and no player decisions. And seriously, the lack of puzzles in this game is also a huge disappointment on its own. The character is an electrician by trade, so it makes sense for it to be easy for him to just walk up to a fuse box, pull out a broken fuse, and plug a new one in with just a simple button press from the player. But he repeatedly reminds the other characters, and also the player, that he has no clue about how the rest of the rig works, but yet all he ever has to do is pull a single lever or turn a single valve to fix something. It would make sense if things like pumping floodwater or operating the flare stack or balancing the ballasts were actual complicated puzzles for the player, because they would also be difficult and complicated things that are outside the skills and wheelhouse of the player character. But instead, we get moments like this.
Looks like a fucking spaceship. I'm not touching anything Finlay doesn't tell me to.
Dude, there's 3 buttons on that panel. No, it's not a friggin' spaceship. But I'm not here to give a full review of Still Wakes the Deep. I have a full written review on my blog at www.MegaBearsFan.net if you want to read that. Spoiler alert, I think the game is mediocre, as I've already hinted at. But instead, today I want to talk about this game's principal inspiration, or perhaps inspirations. How it fails to live up to that principal inspiration, and how it might actually do a better job of living up to a different work of fiction that may or may not have been one of the game's principal inspirations. Basically, Still Wakes the Deep does not really hold up as a game adaptation of John Carpenter's The Thing. The player never really gets a chance to explore much of the oil rig or get to know any of the other characters before the inciting incident, and once the inciting incident happens, there is no transitional period while the rig and characters are slowly being taken over by some alien influence. The character just wakes up, and the rig is already falling apart, and the other characters have already transformed into Cronenberg monsters. So all the suspense, intrigue, paranoia, and mystery that makes The Thing such an excellent and suspenseful film is completely missing from Still Wakes the Deep. There's none of the who might be the thing kind of stuff going on in this game at all. But while Still Wakes the Deep doesn't actually play much like The Thing, there is another work of fiction that I was repeatedly reminded of while playing the game. And I have no idea if the Chinese Room was actually inspired by this work or not. That work is H.P. Lovecraft's short story, The Color Out of Space. This might very well be my favorite Lovecraft story. Part of the reason why I like The Color Out of Space so much is that the thing, the alien or whatever it is, that causes the story is genuinely alien and mysterious. The alien, again, if you can even call it that, isn't some typical slender gray alien with big eyes, nor is it even the typical Lovecraftian tentacle monster. The alien is literally an ominous glowing light. It's a color, possibly slightly outside of the visible light spectrum, but still somehow perceptible to human senses. Not necessarily visible, but yet still something that we can see and even feel. All the abhorrent grounds seemed faintly luminous with more than the fitful moonbeams, but this new glow was something definite and distinct, and appeared to shoot up from the black pit of the well, like a softened ray from a searchlight, giving dull reflections in the little ground pools where the water had been emptied. It had a very queer color, and as all the men clustered around the window, Ami gave a violent start, for this strange beam of ghastly miasma was to him of no unfamiliar hue. And now that well was belching forth to the night a pale, insidious beam of the same demonic tint. Of all of the madness-inducing monsters that Lovecraft is famous for, the color from The Color Out of Space is perhaps the most genuinely incomprehensible. While reading the story, it's something that is vividly described, yet still difficult to imagine and even harder to visualize. After all, how can we as human beings possibly visualize a color that isn't actually visible to the human eye? All the farm was shining with the hideous unknown blend of color. That alien and undimensioned rainbow of cryptic poison from the well, something feeling, lapping, reaching, scintillating, straining, and malignly bubbling in its cosmic and unrecognizable chromaticism. This very concept makes The Color Out of Space fundamentally difficult to adapt to any visual medium, such as television or movies or a video game, and even attempting to adapt it to such a medium is kind of a bold decision on its own right. The approach that's been taken by film adaptations that I've seen is for the performers to try to sell the idea that they perceive something beyond whatever the special effects artists actually put on the screen. Then the director limits what is put on the screen so that the audience's impression of the color is filtered through the performative perception of the actors.
Big flash, like a pink light, or actually, I don't even know what color it was. It wasn't like any color I'd ever seen before.
This method doesn't quite work as well for video games, however, since the interactive nature of a game means that the player is supposed to be in the same headspace as the player character, directly experiencing what the character experiences and seeing what they're seeing. Sure, a game could never show the alien and just have cutscenes in which the characters talk about what they're seeing and how weird the alien thing is or looks, but then that's not very great game design. After all, if the golden rule for filmmaking is show, don't tell, then the analogous rule for video games would be play, don't show. So, since the Chinese Room is working in an interactive visual medium, they take a slightly different approach to what I've seen from films. They use subtle sound cues in order to make it seem as though the alien and the colors that it emits are something that we hear as well as see. And this is also something that's in Lovecraft's story as well. They do describe that the characters, hear strange sounds as well, not just see strange colors and lights. The game also uses other graphical and feedback effects to imply that the character feels the alien presence instead of just seeing and hearing it. If you stand too close to the alien, there will be a bubbling effect in the periphery of the screen, similar to what it looks like when a film reel is burning and bubbling. The character even describes the sensation like having a headache or feeling sick. And as a migraine sufferer, as someone who has suffered from migraines all my life, I, and I'm sure anyone else who has ever had an intense migraine, relate to this visual depiction. This kind of gives an effect as though proximity to the alien and the strange glow that it emits is just too intense for the character's eyes or mind to handle. But it isn't actually burning the character's eyes the way that, say, staring into the sun would, since there's no permanent damage. Like, it's not an overwhelmingly bright light that is physically burning the eyes. As soon as you turn the camera away, the effect ceases and the character can see just fine. No permanent damage. This is where the design of the alien from Still Wakes the Deep gets genuinely interesting. Because the creature, the alien, is actually kind of pretty. And I, the player, want to look at it. We've seen games like Bloodborne that try to systemize the idea of learning arcane forbidden knowledge in the form of that game's insight mechanic, revealing things about the game world that the player cannot otherwise see. Many other Lovecraft-inspired games, from Eternal Darkness to The Sinking City and many others, have sanity effects in which the character's sanity is treated like a second health bar. Lose too much sanity, and the camera starts going all Dutch, the character might start hallucinating, and eventually, the player probably gets a game over. But these effects are all the result of the character and the player seeing or experiencing things that are horrific and ugly and disgusting. Proximity to grotesque monsters drains the character's sanity. Encounters against deadly boss monsters gives the player of Bloodborne insight. That's how Lovecraft aliens and monsters are usually depicted in video games and in a lot of other adaptations, as ugly, disgusting monsters. And yes, it is true that the alien in Still Wakes the Deep is not totally like the color from Lovecraft's story. This alien does have a physical corporeal body that grows and spreads throughout the Biera D oil rig, and which seems to consume any humans it touches. The color in Lovecraft's story falls to Earth in a meteor, but it does not have a corporeal body. It does, however, change the plants, wildlife, and people that are exposed to it. So while it doesn't have a true physical form, it does still kind of grow and consume the environment and life that surrounds it. So I'm not trying to say that I think Still Wakes the Deep is intended to be a loose adaptation of The Color Out of Space or anything like that. I'm honestly not even sure if the designers were consciously trying to allude to The Color Out of Space when they designed the alien or scenario, because they are different, but they are also very similar in the ways that I've already described, and also in one very important way. They both emit a strange glow, and that glow is beautiful and captivating to look at. Of course, beauty is subjective, so your reaction will vary. Personally, I found the specific visual effect to be absolutely mesmerizing and almost soothing in a way. Like, at times, I found myself just standing and staring at the vibrant purples, blues, greens, and reds, especially when they shone through glass or windows or through the seams of a doorway, when it would kind of form this moving kaleidoscope effect, kind of like light being filtered through moving water, even though there wasn't any water for the light to be moving through. At every opportunity, I wanted to see more of the alien, as if I, the player, were being drawn into the alien's madness-inducing hypnosis, and this was true even when the screen was burning and bubbling and the character was complaining about having a headache. I wanted to see the monster, and I was compelled to look at it, even though it was clearly causing discomfort for the player character. This effect of making me, the player, feel compulsively drawn to the alien is an exceptional feat that I don't think I've ever encountered in any other cosmic horror or Lovecraftian video game that I've ever played. The Bira D may not have much personality in its art design, but this alien is an absolute masterclass in both video game and Lovecraftian creature design. Better yet, we never have a climatic boss fight against the alien. We don't find some beating heart or brain to shoot or blow up with dynamite. We never see anything in this creature that even remotely resembles life on Earth. As such, even by the end of the game, after the credits have rolled, the alien is still mysterious and unknowable. What was it? Where did it come from? What did it want? Was it trying to hurt and kill everyone? Or were they just so drawn to it, like I was, that they became one with it of their own volition? Was it really dangerous? Or were we just not prepared for what it had to offer? And are there more like it under the oceans, waiting for another errant oil drill or earthquake for it to spring forth from the abyss? In the true spirit of cosmic horror, Still Wakes the Deep does not give us any satisfactory answers to these questions. Thanks for watching.
What is this fucking stuff doing to me?